everyone palled around with everyone else, so to speak.
What did you guys do when you palled around?
Well, of course, we were all over the hills. And also, I can't think of, we could always entertain ourselves. And in fact, I can remember I used to be great at cooking. I would go and get the bacon and everything that we had at the house, and then we'd go build a fire somewhere and cook it and eat it, you know, that kind of thing.
Where'd you get the bacon?
From home, from my dad.
Like he raised it?
No, the bacon we bought. My dad bought slab bacon, and you had to cut it. He always cut his own bacon, but he would buy that from the store. Here in town? Yes, here in town. You know, the general store here stocked most anything you would need. We would actually go to, usually Alamosa, sometimes Salida, but you only went like once a month or so to get things. Who knows?
How long did it take to get to Alamosa?
No, I guess we drove about 55 miles an hour, 50, 55. We weren't like today. You don't drive 70 and 80 or whatever.
And was there electricity when you were born here?
There was electricity in my house. Of course, like I said, Harry and Eula Glenn had electricity in all the houses, you know, the two houses that were down there where we lived, and also, of course, their own. And there were people here in town, a lot of people that did have, like, you know, Margaret Hayes she lived in the post office. When I was here, when I was 12, she had not married Earl Williams. So Johnny and Linda and Margaret lived in the back of that small post office down there. This thing that says hardware now was the post office.
Until when?
Well, you know, I'm not real sure when they built or changed the other over, because that happened one time when I was not here. Because they moved it up to her house at one time. We had it when Margaret was married to Earl Williams. They moved the post office into part of their house. So you had to, you know, just everyone had a box. So you would get your mail there.
And that was all up here where Johnny's place
right,
is now?
the old house.
You said Harry and Eula
Glenn.
They were Alfred's stepchildren?
That was Eula was Harry Glenn's wife. She was John L. Lewis's personal secretary when he met her.
Who's John L. Lewis?
He ran the unions. Look him up in the history books. It's very interesting. Yeah, he was the big thing in the AFL-CIO.
And she was his personal
secretary. That's where Harry Glenn met her in Washington, D.C.
But Harry was Alfred's stepson?
Right, because Mrs. Collins, you know, they had quite a bit of money. And but yeah, Harry Glenn, they raised Herefords, of course. You knew that when the Baca did too, but Alfred Collins. But Harry had some that he raised, and he had one horse I remember that was the great-great-grandson of Man of War, which won the Kentucky Derby one time.
I'm gonna fix that.
Yeah, that'll change our stuff a little bit.
But yeah, I'll wait for you.
You need some more tape there, Adam? I think so. Yeah, I'll get it fresh.
You mean that Gorilla Tape isn't working?
Oh, sorry. Maybe get the other side too, just to make sure it's doubles here. I'm just getting one. That stuff's useless when I try that. Yeah, I'm trying the middle too. All right, nice soft light again.
And you can edit out all the stuff you don't want. But yeah, but anyway, it was interesting living there, you know. But and they would show those cows every now in the shows. And there was one we called Rudolph that my dad had helped raise since he was little, and I know he would butt the bale of hay. you know, till he got so big, my dad said you just had to practically get a stick and thump him on the back, get him to leave you alone, because he got so big he'd knock you down. But yeah, then later on, my dad did odd jobs around for everyone. He did lots of work. He built Shearer's cabin up here, the main one here on the road. And he did a lot of different work around like that. He built that big one that used to belong to Raylan Evans between here and Moffett, where the Yak Ranch is. He built that one too. But anyway, he was a cowboy. He was a jack of all trades, is what they always said.
What was his name?
Fred Cox.
Fred Cox.
And you were wondering about ghost stories?
Heck yeah.
Well, we all thought that the old Kiwanis building was haunted. You know, it was the road. Unfortunately, they tore it down because it would have been a great thing to still have here. But it was the main office building for the Baca. You know, they had their offices in it here in town.
Johnny Hayes was talking about the hardwood floor and the marble lined
Oh, and they had
fireplace.
they had that big safe upstairs. You know, every one of us tried to get that thing open, you know.
Like they left it there?
Oh yeah, it was built in. It was a huge safe.
Do you think there was anything in it?
No. But you know how kids are.
Yeah.
I can remember one time, because it was vacant, when of course you asked what we did in our spare time. Well, we roamed around a lot. But I went in there, and several of us were in there, and there was a little bird nest built on kind of some of the trim. And I looked at it, I thought it was so cute, and I picked up the little bird. Lord, there were mites everywhere. They started crawling up my arms. It was terrible. So anyway, I had to put the bird back and run down to the creek and wash all those mites off. And then when I went inside, I got to looking, and there were just solid mites going up that wall, the trim of that wall of the door. You know, so anyway, I just thought, oh my God, I don't know if those birds survived or not, but I've never seen mites like that.
And Alfred Collins died in 51, so that was before you were born?
No, I was born in 1942.
Oh, 42.
Yes. See,
But it was the 50s when you lived here.
you're right.
Okay.
And then when I was a junior and senior in high school, I lived here, and I graduated from high school in Moffett.
Did you ever meet Alfred Collins?
I never did, but Mrs. Collins I did.
Helen?
Helen. My dad used to go to Denver to do work for Helen sometimes. She'd have him come up there to do certain projects. And she had a horse named Two Spot, or Eula, really, and it was Eula's basically. But, you know, that I just know it was left over from the ranch days.
Do you have any good memories or, oh well, some people come in and tell wonderful stories about the Collins, and some people come in and were maybe not so pleased.
I didn't have any bad problems, and I don't know that my dad really did either. I mean, you know, he of course my dad didn't say anything bad about anyone really, but he didn't have any bad feelings toward him. But I'm sure if he worked I think she was quite demanding from everything that I understand. I mean, she was very much on top of everything.
Was she still doing the Christmas presents for the kids when you were here?
Not when I was here, no. But what they did do, Eula, they had a large truck, like a 3/4 ton truck with a big bed on the back. And in the summers, she would take us kids swimming up at Mineral Hot Springs. So she'd load everyone in, all the kids in town in there. And we'd go up there, and of course she financed our little excursions. But she did that any number of times when I was a child up here. And I remember one time we came back, and there had been a cloud burst. And where the kiosk is now, when you pass that curve, I mean, you can't believe all the dirts, rocks, and how much it had washed down through there. And I know we drove up where I got out, and my dad and Ed King were in my house where I lived, and Ed had left the door open on his car, and of course it was just saturated. But it was a big deal to us kids, oh, look, God, what happened? We all run in there. And Ed said, well, we had a cloud burst. Washed all this stuff away. Of course, they were in there having a little drink out of the bottle and everything. But yeah, it was fun. Everything was a big deal in those days.
Do you think that life was easy or hard for those folks?
Well, no one had any money, let's face it. I mean, a few, like, say, the Glens did, but I mean, and some of them had regular employment that paid well, probably the post office, things like that. But, as for people with high-paying jobs around here, no, there wasn't any. Now, there was reliable. I think that Bill Sizemore had a good job. I think he worked in the shop out at, on the Baca and stuff. But
And Billy Hutchinson seemed
well,
like
he
had a
worked.
good job.
He worked for Harry Glenn. After my dad left, he worked for Harry Glenn. He and Lee, his wife.
But was that a good job?
Well, what you were just a cowboy. I won't say just a cowboy, but I mean, that's what you did basically, is you took care of the livestock and transported or moved anything around that needed to be done, or any work that needed to be done. That's what he did.
Do you remember seeing cowboys riding through town?
Well, not unless it were us. As for watching working cowboys like out on the Baca or anything, no, I never did. Now, I'm sure Jim can tell you about things like that. Of course, Sam, his Uncle Sam and my dad were really good friends, so. And
Sam
Tooker.
Tooker.
Yeah, because the old Tooker place was out where the golf course is now.
When you left and you came back, when did you come back here to live full time?
When I was a junior in high school.
But then you left again, right?
Well, after I graduated from high school, my senior year, then I went to Texas because I had to go to school. Once you get out, you have to do something. But anyway, I went to school down there, but I worked in the medical field for over 30 years.
In Texas? So then you came back here in the 80s?
When I retired,
80s?
about 10 years ago,
10 years ago.
I moved back full time.
And you still had the house?
Right, we had the house all those years. Such as it was only 2 rooms when my dad moved that on there. I never did live in that house. He moved that on there. He bought that lot for $25. And then the house came from in the middle, out in one of the hayfields between here and Moffett. It was sitting out there just abandoned. And I'm sure someone gave it to him, so for him moving it. And he moved it up there, and then he fixed the 2 rooms up. I mean, he dropped the ceilings and he, put new wiring in it and things like that. And so we used to come up here, and after he died, then we would come up in the summers, and my brother would too.
So he stayed here. Did he stay here the whole time?
Yes.
Oh, so he
did.
died here?
He died in 1964.
Is he in the cemetery?
Yes. He's buried out here.
And he kept finding work, jack of all trades?
Oh, yeah. He did never have a problem. I mean, there's probably not anyone that lived in the town at that time whose husbands or someone couldn't do it. He also did a lot of work for like Charlie Bunker and people like that around Moffett. And I've even known him to go to Monte Vista and work.
How did you decide to come back here 10 years ago?
Well, see, I'm an outdoor person. And when I lived in Texas, I had to go a long ways to hunt the rocks that I usually hunt. Because I hunt a lot of things like that. Hike and hunt rocks and arrowheads and everything. So I decided that if I lived up here, and it didn't cost me anything to live here basically, other than the, routine things, and I would still be closer to areas where you could search for minerals. And of course, I've found quite a few arrowheads around this area too.
Are you glad you came back?
Yeah. It has changed a lot. It is nothing like it was in the 50s or 60s. Nothing.
What's different?
Well, the people are very different. Of course, it is everywhere. It didn't make a difference where you live. People are not the same. But, yeah, there's, I can see things now that the people that lived here then would faint. To put it bluntly, faint. But that's just the way the world is, you know, it's changed. I do remember, you asked how we entertained ourselves. Well, I remember one time we had a manure fight. And see, down there at Harry Glenn's, of course, they were with horses and cattle. So we piled up, we got our piles wherever we were, our ammunition, so to speak.
Wet or dry?
Oh, it was wet, honey. And then, you know, then you'd run it around and try to find someone to throw it at. And we did that more than one time, and I remember poor old Carol King, and she was the youngest of all of us. She was probably about 10 at the time that happened. But that was later on, and it was kind of frozen a little bit. And this was a different time. And she looked out from behind the haystack about the time I threw this frozen cow patty. And I mean, it hit her, gave her the biggest black eye you have ever seen in your life. And of course, you know, her mother and dad, Ed, Ed and Felice, they were tolerant people. But yeah, we roamed around a lot, just all over the hills. And
Did you ever, oh, hold on, let's see what this is.
Oh, it's gone quick. Pause.
She's bringing lunch.
She's about to walk through.
you must be hungry.
Paused?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
See, you'll need to refresh yourself in a minute.
Ready? Ready. Did you guys ever get in trouble from your parents?
Some, but not much. Not much. I mean, you had to do a whole lot to get in trouble. I mean, there wasn't a lot to do around here.
Well, like throwing a frozen cow patty.
I never did get in trouble. No, we didn't.
And when you came back and all the changes, does it make you sad or?
I'm not, it's hard to define because I'm not sure that everyone, back in those days, there was a very close-knit community. Of course, today there are many people around here, like neighbors helping neighbors, etc. In those days, people still helped each other a great deal. If someone no one would have ever gone hungry or anything like that. And I do know, see, the McKee family was a large family, and they lived where the Elephant Cloud used to be. That's the old McKee place to me. As you come
On the
in.
corner?
I lived there when I was a senior. My dad rented it from the McKees. But yeah, it was interesting. And so cold. I mean, you have no idea. In the winter, that none of these old houses had any insulation in them. And of course, we all burnt wood, of course, and it was interesting.
But you didn't have chainsaws.
It was all done by, in my shed, I still have cross-cut saws and stuff like that. But my dad did have a table saw when after years went on and electricity became more prevalent. He did have a table saw that he used when he worked.
Did you use it for firewood?
Occasionally, if he was just cutting small wood, he'd just run it through there, but nothing major. But we burned mostly cottonwood too. In those days, most people did not burn the pinyon then.
Why not? Because it's too hard to
I
cut.
don't know, unless it was just, I don't know that was it. I've wondered about that, but and again, I wonder if it's because you get so much pitch out of it, and you'd have to clean your stovepipes and everything a lot more. See, I believe that cottonwood is kind of a clean wood, so you don't really run into that.
Yeah.
Because I don't ever remember anybody cleaning their stovepipes.
Yeah. A few people have been talking about the geysers out in the valley.
Oh, well, I've seen some, but you know, the artesian wells, they, the history in Jack Harlan's book covers a lot how they dropped the water levels in the valley from all the farming that they did in the early 1900s when it grew great wheat, but they used so much of the water from those artesian wells that it dropped the water levels. So, but I do know places. In fact, I think I remember Kim Snyder, when her dad and mother when they lived in Alamosa, I believe that they had one of those artesians in the winter that they'd let it spray and it would freeze. As you drove into town, Jim said they used to put colored, like food coloring in there, and it would make it different colors and stuff like that. And then it would freeze and have this big, tall, frozen geyser-looking thing. And I do remember that on the edge of Alamosa. But like I said, the water ran freely. But we've had some wet years when you know what it's like whenever you go, like when T Road flooded and everything. But yeah, but still, it's not like it used to be.
And since you've been back for these 10 years, have you made friends that you didn't have from the old days?
Oh yeah, I do have. Well, I'm Mary Lauer and Enid and people like that. Most of the people are related, maybe to something I do in the town, such as Karen Share and all that. Of course, we all expand or whatever. Basically, I stay very connected to the people I used to know. And even in Moffat area, the Stagners and people like that, and the Friels, all these people that I knew. Of course, it broadens your perspective, I guess you could say, but all of us were there and around. And a lot of these people have never left. They primarily remained here, like Bob Bunker, and some of them may have left a little while, but they all came back. Kind of like me. No, I always looked at this as primarily my main home, because I had friends, even the ones that have moved away and live, like some of the McKees or the Vanderpools, and people like that have moved far away, we're still in close contact. For instance, Sean Homer's mother, Mariana, she lives in Pueblo, and her kids knew my kids. Like Sean's like a year or two older than my oldest daughter, and his sister Christine, she was a little younger than my youngest daughter, but they all played together in the summers and things like that.
Do you have grandkids?
Oh yes.
Do they come here?
Yeah, they do every now and then. The boys used to, and most all of them are boys. Oh yeah, they came up, because I used to have a 4-wheeler, and they of course had to buzz around town and everything, and go in the hills.
Yeah, what's your favorite thing to share with them?
Well, out the outdoors. Definitely. And we still go many places, all of us. One of them lives in Grand Junction that will be finishing his schooling over there. But we all hunt rocks. That's what it boils down to. We all do the camping and the hiking and the hunting of artifacts and minerals and everything. That's primarily a family deal.
Do you still get up in the hills?
Yes, I do. I consider myself very fortunate because I have many friends that are so crippled up that they can't get anywhere. Yes, I still do. I have the dogs. Of course, several years ago, I was in the Pinyons out here, and I had 2 coyotes get after me and the dogs, right out past the cemetery. So I have a concealed weapons permit, and after I had that happen to me, I started carrying a gun. I never had up until that time.
Have you had other scary wild animal situations?
No, I haven't. Of course, I've run up on skunks before and turned around and run like hell. But yeah, I mean, but nothing vicious or anything. I was afraid of those coyotes that day. I've never had any get that close to me, and they would come within 10 or 12 feet.
Oh.
And so I finally picked the small dog up and carried it because I thought what they were trying to do was lure them away, because they'd run up, you know, the female and the male, and try to lure them away. Of course, the big dog would run after them, but then she'd come right back. But the small one, I was afraid, didn't have enough sense, and he'd get out there and then they'd grab him. But so I picked him up and carried him. But really, that's the first time I've ever had any get that close. And I've read about it, and I've seen it on television where around Denver people have been attacked by coyotes.
Do you remember the deer in the 40s and 50s?
The wildlife did not come into town. They didn't eat everything you have now. You could actually have flowers outside, and they didn't come in town and eat everything you have. But I can remember I hunted deer with my dad, you know, when they hunted and things like that. In fact, I had my own tiny little trap line. The one time I thought, when I was 12, I thought I was going to be real smart. And I'd just run this little trap line and catch me some rabbits. I had like 5 or 6 traps out. So I know one time I found a foot in one where it had been chewed off. But anyway, that was just something I did when I was a kid. I just was always interested in that kind of thing, so.
And how do you feel about the deer now?
I think they're a real nuisance. I do like the deer, don't get me wrong, and I think the fawns are so pretty and so cute. And I love to see some of the other wildlife too, like a bobcat or something. And but I hate that they're so tame, that they come in all the time. That they've lost their wildness, I guess you could say.
Elaine was saying that everybody had little green lawns and gardens and flower
And you
beds.
had all kinds of hollyhocks and pretty flowers.
You're doing your part to keep that up, right?
Well, you know, I put a fence up, and then I finally I had to add a deal and put some reflective things on it.
To keep the deer out?
Yes, they jump my fence and get in there and eat all my flowers. In fact, I was gone this week to La Junta. I came back, and somehow or another, the old deer got in there again, and it didn't eat everything I had in there, but it did eat the blooms off my columbines. It ate the leaves off my lilac bush, things like that, but it would not to the extreme that it usually does. But yeah, it just, you know, it's sad when you want to have a flower and you can't do it.
If Crestone's going to keep growing, do you have any hopes for how it grows or what that looks like?
Well, I feel like there will be a lot of people come in that have ideas to expand it, maybe in ways that I might not agree with. But nothing stays the same, like I said, you know. And I hate it because I do think some areas, I saw a deal one time by the cowboy poet Baxter Black.
Yeah.
And it was very true whenever he said, people will move into a place to get away from things that they don't like. And they'll move here, and then they start changing things. And then when they get it to where it was where they were before and they don't like it, then they leave, basically. And I kind of agree with that. I don't agree that they should have spent, that we had the grant to do the streets. I do not like that at all, because I think part of the charm that Crestone had was remaining a little bit more rustic. And I have seen things on PBS where they had towns that still had wooden walks. And you know, of course, here we had to put the sidewalk in. And I realized that the upkeep on a wooden walk, you know, deterioration would happen. But it still is a charming aspect. And that's my own sentiments on that. Because, you know, my kids love to come here. One thing my daughter did say is that she said, I've just never seen some of these places look so junky. She said it's like there's no ordinance at all to clean anything up. And she'd been coming here since she was very young.
New houses or old houses?
Just where people have neglected to keep their property up, or just keep moving things in on it, and it just pretty soon it looks like a junkyard.
Which there's definitely old timers that got junkyards.
Definitely. And I know some.
But your place looks wonderful.
Well, just the front parts. Haven't been to the back, where I have all my pallets stacked. The pallets to the back, but I use those for various things. But yeah, I try to disguise some of it, let's put it that way. I'm not saying mine looks, it certainly doesn't look like Enid's. Enid has a beautiful, beautiful yard. But they're like back again, like Elaine said, you know, I can remember her grandmother's house had these wonderful flowers and everything. You know, and I mean now, it's virtually, unless you have a very high fence, it's virtually impossible to have it anymore.
Her grandma's house was the old Shambhala coffee shop.
Right. Yeah. And of course I remember when the only gas station in town was down where the Elephant Cloud is now, but it was the old Sizemore station. Before, well, when Kurt first bought that, I believe it was still intact, and that's what he used, wasn't it?
I think so.
Before he tore it down and moved on to build what's there now.
Yeah, for the longest time it was in there with the crooked floors.
Yeah, right. That was, yeah, that was the old Sizemore gas station.
And then even the old back building on Kurt's, they told us yesterday, I can't remember where it was from, but it might have even been like the old, no, that wasn't it. I can't remember, there's just so many buildings that got moved around.
Well, they did, and and I know where there were buildings that are no longer there and that were just torn down, you know, that, you know, Sean Homer told me one time, no, it wasn't Sean. It was Larry Sizemore told me that there used to be a big ditch that ran from up there, kind of up where Sean lives, and it came down over where the inn is now and the post office, you know, behind there. There was a huge ditch there, and people used to throw their trash in that. Well, and of course it got covered up. No telling what's underground there. But I also remember when the dump used to be out behind kind of where the school is now, the charter school. It was at you'd go by the old farm place down there, and behind the school area back in there, there were people dumped all kinds of things back in there.
Probably still all there.
Oh, I'm sure a lot of it. But I'm not sure that at some time or another they didn't dump out here on the road going to the graveyard. Because if you go off, you know where they've kind of dug that pit where they put all the junk, when they were working on the roads and everything. Right back in there, there is piles and piles of tin cans and things like that. I have found a few old bottles back in there. I think it's been primarily hunted out. But there used to be all kinds of trash dumped on that road too. And I can remember going where, you know, where Mary Meisman lives, the old Jack Tua place. They used to dump back in the Pinions back behind there. And we used to walk out in on that road through into the Pinions, and I can remember finding all kinds of things out in there. And there would be like somebody had, like they dumped an old button box or something, and there'd be hundreds of buttons, things like that. I mean, just, or a Lucky Strike tin. Back when, during World War II, they had the Lucky Strike Goes to War tin, and it would be green, the name, you know, the army green, with the Lucky Strike symbol on it, and on it was a tin box. I found one of those out there one time. So there's no telling, you know.
Yeah. That's a lot of dumping.
Yeah. Well, you know, there was no
Yeah.
restrictions.
Yeah.
You just dumped, or I didn't know anybody that threw it out. But I will say this too, when I lived here, when I was 12, we had electricity, but we had no running water and no indoor plumbing.
Oh.
And that went on a lot of places clear up into the 60s. And when we lived at the place, the old McKee place on the corner coming into town when I was a senior, we still had outdoor. We had an outhouse. And we did have a pump that you could pump your water. And we did have electricity by that time there. But it was like going back, what I tell everyone, it's like going back 50 years or more in time. When I moved here, when I was a kid. So I mean, at that time it's like going back 50 years before. I mean, it was just so backwards, really.
Like the rest of the country had indoor plumbing.
They had moved on, you know, at the end of World War II and everything, and then going up into the Korean War and everything. You know, most of the, you know, most people, you just didn't see outdoor unless you were way off. But,
Did you get to be around Toots much?
oh, yes. I used to go to Toots's every day. Yes, I spent a lot of time with her. See, Mariana, the daughter, was my age. Mariana and I were in the same class. Tommy was 2 years younger, and then Jim was like, I think he's 7 years older than I am.
Mariana, is that Sean's mom?
Oh yes, I went to Toots's all the time. And you know, she did, you talk about when I was here, you know, they didn't have running water or indoor plumbing or electricity when I was 12. But they did have electricity by the time when I moved back here and stayed all the time. Oh yes, I've been many a mile with Toots. They didn't have a vehicle when I was young, and so my dad would loan her his truck if she wanted to go to town to buy groceries or something, like to Alamosa or somewhere. But she did house cleaning and odd jobs, and she did a lot for Eula Glenn. And there were people that tried to help, you know, not only the Tookers, but, or, you know, the Homers, but, you know, of course the boys got older. When Jim got older, you know, of course he worked. The boys all worked in the hay fields in the summer to make money. And of course Jim, I think he had a car, I think, and of course he was older and he helped, you know, and everything, but yeah, they were really poor. She was a character and a half, I can tell you. She could tell more stories than anyone, you know, and I told you about the time that somebody plucked all the feathers out of her rooster and it was running around with no feathers on, and she swore that Bill Stewart did that. So I don't know, but it was terrible.
Did she laugh or was she mad?
No, she was mad.
She was mad.
But you know, she claimed there was somebody that used to do all kinds of stuff to aggravate her. Like they'd unscrew her porch light after she got electricity and stuff. You know, someone would sneak over there and unscrew the porch light and all. But yeah, she had her beliefs, very much so. She's very opinionated. Yeah, it's been like because I remember you know, when she did laundry, after they got electricity, she finally did have this old washer kind of like I had. And it was an old wringer washer, but she made all of her own soap from the bacon drip. You know, she kept all of her bacon grease and everything, so she rendered up and made her own soap.
Did it smell like bacon or did it smell
No, you know, you use lye and stuff in it, and it just, when you mix it all up and it gets to this certain consistency, you pour it in a pan and you let it get hard, and then you cut it into bars. Then you take a knife and you shave off however much you want to put in your wash water or whatever. And that's how that works. But yeah, and people used lard to cook with a lot in those days, more so than like today. I think they've kind of gone back to, it makes the best pie crusts and things like that. But you know, you can, a lot of people like to eat so healthy they eat little lard these days. Except Hispanics, I think, and people still use a lot of it.
Do you still use it?
No. I don't fry many foods, Adam, because I don't like to clean up the mess. But back when I was a kid, and I did learn to cook I cooked on a wood stove, cook stove, and I still use mine in the winter. But I can remember when we had that one, it was a big one, and it had a reservoir on the side that kept hot water. So, you know.
I had one of those.
And so that was pretty handy.
So, in my experience in being in Texas, I come from a lot of rednecks, and a lot of them were really sweet old men and women, and very open-minded and open-hearted. And I've found a lot of similarities here in Crestone with old timers and the mountain folks. Do you see that, or?
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, of course, I will tell you this, you know, I was married to a saddle bronc rider. My second husband was a rodeo cowboy and farmer. But I do know that a lot of them are very opinionated too. So, but they also use the barter system a great deal, and that's what you see here too.
What do you think makes these old timers different?
Not a great deal, because I know some very opinionated old timers here too. Yeah. And you know, when you say redneck, yeah, redneck.
But somebody like Jim Homer, and I showed up with long hair and a beard and sandals and being a hippie, and he didn't bat an eye about showing me the ropes.
He'd already seen them.
Already seen the hippies?
Yeah, he'd already seen them here. Yeah. You know, like I said, I did say all along that they would faint. Of course, it would have never entered my dad's mind to buy water. I can tell you that. Or any of them around here. Something like that would have been inconceivable. So, and it practically, you know, think how old I was when they started selling water. And people actually bought it. So, you know, times and everything has changed so much. You can't totally live exactly like they did back then. And people had hard lives a lot of times, the real old timers. When I was a kid, now they grew up rough. They had very little, they were hungry sometimes, and they had no money. And I've often noticed that as much hunting as you do around here, say I was going to use a metal detector or something, you don't find a lot of change or anything around here because people didn't have anything.
Right. What do you...
Now see, Edna and those girls that grew up, they also used a cook stove, but when they got a little older, they actually put an electric stove in there too, so that they wasn't totally limited. But I will tell you this, when I was a kid, we had pancakes one day, we had bacon and eggs the next. And everyone in this town ate pancakes, pancakes, pancakes. And I can tell you, I got so sick of pancakes, I didn't care if I ever ate another one when I was a kid. I mean, you know, that it's just something you had, you know, if you wanted to eat, you ate what you had, but I'm telling you.
Could you get syrup?
Oh yeah, we had syrups and we had everything to go with it. It's just that when you eat pancakes every day almost, you go spend the night with someone, you eat pancakes for breakfast. It was just me, I guess, because...
When was the last time you had pancakes?
I make them once in a great while. But you know, it's like when I grew up when I was a kid, and my dad was the same way. He loved roast. I mean, and he wanted to fix a roast often. And I tell you, my brother and I both got to the point where we couldn't hardly stand roast. You know, and my mother cooked them too all the time. It was just some easy meal to fix.
Especially when you got a lot of work to do
Right.
and kids to feed.
But, you know, everyone has their own thing.
What do you think some of the most important things for the next generations will be to remember about Crestone?
Just the simple life. Keep it simple. That's my whole thing. You know, it's so hard to do with the politics and things that's out there nowadays. You know, in some ways, people believed in, like, say, my parents' day or before, when the politicians did their thing. You know, everyone believed you either liked one or the other or whatever, you know, and you voted however you voted. But you believed everything that people told you. I do believe this. Nowadays, they question much more. You have much more volatility in everything, and I don't know, it's just hard to keep it simple, I think, today.
Are you worried about the next generations?
A little bit. Of course, they can say, oh, look at her. That old woman, she walked 25 miles barefoot in the snow to get to school or something. But no, truly, I think the problems that are out there are just going to be magnified. I just hope the United States can remain like it is, I guess you could say, or free. I worry a lot about some of that.
Do you still feel free?
Yeah, I feel like I can come and go as I want to, but I'm not sure this is always going to what it's going to be. Yeah, I feel like, you know, basically, when I grew up, you could do pretty much what you wanted to or what you were capable of doing. Nowadays, I think there's a lot that just defines the way you'll be.
Or limits?
Limits could be a good word. Limits. Of course, but, you know, of course, I believe, you know, of course, I don't want to get on history, you know, or anything like that but I feel like I just worry. I really do worry about what's going to happen to the kids of tomorrow.
Is there anything you think we as parents can do for them?
I think you're going to be a victim of whatever takes place. And I think you can raise them to be self-sufficient or to do with less or whatever, but I think it could be a real problem.
How do you feel about this project that we're working on?
Well, I like this. I think it's a cool idea. Of course, the kids are going to say, oh, you know. But no, when we had simple tastes, I guess you could say, when I was a kid.